Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Good morning and welcome back to my lecture for the course Partition of India in Print Media and Cinema. Today we are going to continue our discussion on women in the context of partition. So, we talk about the roles of the newspapers. Newspapers, journals and different media played a major role, a pivotal role during the partition times. So, the journalists and attorneys, particularly the ones that were had a more greater influence by virtue of being sponsored by the larger parties, they had a lot of money, they were backed by governments and different political parties. These newspapers could dramatize and elaborate the situation, blow it up beyond the proportion, and they had a very crucial role in turning communal tensions into a daily problem. It became almost a bread and butter for the newspapers. K.K. Mitra presided over the founding of the Women's Protection League, which was preceded by a meeting of the Indian Journalists Association. So, P.K. Shankar of the newly formed Anand Bazar Patrika and Basumati expressed homage to those who helped in the anti-abduction campaign. Through their headlines, newspapers with a monopoly on the portrayal of the daily happenings effectively created a typical homogeneous paradigm of a situation that was in reality diverse, layered and more nuanced and complicated. There is a coinage thanks to the media, popular media. There is this term Muslim Gunda that came to be used to refer to all the Muslims. The problem of abduction provided a forum for forming a network between the Hindu communalists or reformers and the Dalit groups. So, this was an attempt in turn to homogenize the Hindu community. The elites were building their own communities in a very homogeneous way. We understand that the formation was Pakistan was also the idea of two nation theory was fanned at a very elite level and it was sent vertically downwards. It actually fanned the sentiments of the masses and they got sucked into these whirlpools, these these larger politics. And similarly, the Hindus were systematically sucking in the support of the Dalits as an attempt to homogenize the Hindu community. So, even before they renamed themselves as Namasudras, the Chandals would forbid their women from going to the marketplace. So, there were attempts to prevent widow marriage and so we see that the Dalits, as a result of coming in touch with and through the process of Shuddhikaran, through Brahminization of different Dalit groups had actually started taking on the sacred thread and they claimed becoming one of the upper castes, either Brahmin or Kshatriya, and so they would actually take after and they would define themselves in terms of the casteist values of the Brahmins and the Kshatriyas. They would, and once again the women faced, I mean the community would be reshaped, would be remodeled through the activities or through through the activities of the women, through policing the activities of the women, and through remolding the mundane activities of the women. So, we see that as the Dalits are drawn into the mainstream, they exert a greater control over the Dalit women. So, Rajbanshi publicist Chandreshwar Ray enacted laws that prohibited widow remarriage and the women from going in a public space such as the market. So, in this regard, there have been important studies, one by Joanna Liddell and Rama Joshi, who would note that a traditionally lower caste man asserts his sign of social mobility or social improvement, going up the social ladder, and his economic success through adapting to the cultural behavior and mannerisms of the upper castes. And so, the starting point of such assertion, such the expression of such change starts through the body of the woman. The experimentations with the changes in a particular community, even among the Dalits, it starts with the body of the woman. The starting point is the woman's body. Liddell and Joshi would also note that increased upward mobility among individuals or a group is directly proportional to a greater control over the women's bodies. So, once a person escalates the social ladder, the gender values are more conservative. So, the control could be manifested through mannerisms such as women being disinherited from immovable property such as the land, and their exclusion from productive economy, their removal from public life, and they being limited to the women being limited to the domestic sphere of home, and they being secluded through the system of parda. So, further Hutton would say that stepping up in terms of caste is purely a male centric benefit, something that is in continuation to what Rama Joshi and Joanna Liddell and Rama Joshi had to say, something that is in continuation to what Joshi and Liddell and Joshi had to say. The stepping up the caste is a benefit that happens at the expense of greater hardship being imposed on women, such that the meaning of caste practices does not apply uniformly to all members of a given group. A change in the society of the Dalit that advantages the male could at the same time disadvantage the female counterparts. So, we understand that in the caste system, traditional Hindu caste system, Chandal is ranked as the lowest in the Indian caste hierarchical ladder, because the group originates through a sexual union between a Sudra man and a Brahmin woman. So, Chandal is a symptom of the greatest possible subversion or violation, a rupture or a deviation from the patriarchal rules which safeguard these distinctions of these caste distinctions, demarcations, and social exclusiveness as a way of maintaining biological purity. So, we see the Namasudras becoming conservative in terms of reshaping their policies, their social modes, that the widow remarriage issue became very crucial, and it contributed to a schism, to a rift among the Namasudras in 1922. And a figure like Panchanan Burman. Panchanan Burman is symptomatic of the upper class or the elite Dalit figure, a Rajvanshi that became a barrister, and so he espoused high Hinduism. His social and professional dependence was entirely on the high caste Hindus, and so he was an important figure in the formation of Bangiya Janasangh in collaboration with other upper caste reformers such as UN Mukherjee, Digindra Narayan Bhattacharya, and he dedicated the organization to the cause of intercaste alliance. He dedicated the organization to the cause of intercaste alliance. So, formation of the Kshatriya Samiti and its campaign against abductions predated the Women's Protection League efforts. Women's Protection League was an initiative, an enterprise that was dominated mainly by the prominent upper caste figures. So, Panchanan Burman first publicized the issue of raising the question of abduction in the Legislative Council. So, abduction stories were flooding the pages of Kshatriya by 1924, and Burman continued to record abductions by Muslims in the second half of 1925, and they were translated and published by the Patrika. So, Hindu Mahasabha was trailing behind the Kshatriya Samiti on this issue, right. So, it would be wrong suppose that the elite, the well-off Dalits were any less conservative as compared to the upper caste Hindus. Once the Dalits had become economically more ensconced, they played the same role in shaping the homogeneous image of the homogeneous image of the Muslims, and so they were participating in this larger communal discourse and the larger communal divide that informed the entire period before, after and during the partition. So, the Dalit leaders were also equally conservative. So, honor is one of the main categories that we see that defines patriarchal civilization, by which women's subjugation is already always a humiliation and an affront to the male, right. So, and this becomes all the more amplified if the dishonored woman belongs to a man from the refined class and upper caste. When a Dalit, generally when a Dalit is violated, not much is at stake, but if an upper caste woman is violated, it becomes big news. So, dramatizing Muslim control as a threat to the Hindu male identity was rampant, and it was conducted methodically through these different media, popular media such as newspapers and journals. So, abductions were seen as means of communalizing relations through suppression of many gender related questions. So, when these different groups that were also formed through homosocial bondings talked frequently and commonly about abductions, they were actually going back to the Hindu-Muslim dyad and the Hindu-Muslim debate, and the question of one community being superior than the other and so forth, and this happened through suppression of many gender related issues. The blowing up the question of abduction happened through suppressing other choices, the questions of women's choice and rights. So, choice of only certain cases by the newspapers being selective was because these newspapers had their certain ideology. They had their own ideological inclinations. So, reports evince the collective character of male violence. Reports evince the collective character of male violence. And so, the sheer volume of Muslim action in abduction cases would drown out the involvement of Hindu corps too. So, there were exceptional cases that were selectively being muffled and silenced, such as the Suhasini case, where the Hindu corps were abetting the crime that was committed by the Muslims, or the Kushtia case about the Muslim women's shelter providers. So, the case where Hindus provide shelter to Muslim women. These exceptional cases were not so much being looked at. So, Zoya Hassan talks about the fabric of India in the post-colonial times. She discusses the Shahbano case, which involved an elderly Muslim woman seeking alimony from her former husband after divorce, and she appealed to the then Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi to sanction her plea, but her plea was actually rejected, it was turned down. This was because Rajiv Gandhi had to appease the hardliner, the orthodox Muslim sentiment. So, we see that and this was just this was not just one, I mean, isolated case. We see that in these situations the patriarchal values, regardless of beyond communal lines, actually play a major role. So, a woman, a single woman cannot be appeased at the expense of riling the entire community sentiment. So, Muslims are often considered as a monolithic community with the state's backing, strengthened at the expense of Muslim women's interests. So, Muslims are considered homogeneously as orthodox, such that it is commonly understood that if a Muslim woman's interest is attended, it would go on to enrage the entire community. So, the idea of a monolithic or a homogeneous Muslim, for example, does not take into account the more liberal factions from more liberal Islamic factions such as Tablighi Jamaat, a reformist organization active in South Asia that is strongly egalitarian, and it condemns any institutional norms which promote gender inequality. So, critics such as Katie Gardner would go on to argue that religion's impact on women's lives are overblown. What counts more is the question of class. So, Gardner would say that in defining the meaning and relevance of parda for Muslim women in Bangladesh, religion becomes less important as compared to her class. Religious influences are so deeply interwoven in women's lives that we cannot, after a point, differentiate it from other equally pertinent and equally forceful determinants, one being the class, the other being the caste. So, and it would be important to notice and remember in this regard that in the South Asian context, the Muslims, after having coexisted for many hundreds of years with the Hindus, have also internalized the caste practice or the caste gradation. So, even among the Muslims we see that certain families that traditionally practice, let us say, that are traditionally in blue collar jobs, that are artisans or blacksmiths, would never get married to high caste aristocratic Muslim families. For example, the families of the priests such as the Sayyids, right. So, the caste rationale has been long since internalized also by the Muslims. It would be wrong to say that only the Hindus in this subcontinent practice caste. Maybe it originated with the Hindus, but even the Muslims, the Sikhs, it has the Muslims at least have the caste practice among them. In terms of occupational and general socio-economic differences. So, women do not have any unified identities or interests due to differences in their autonomy and activity. So, we see that the victims of Bangladesh civil war were generally commonly from the poorer sections, whereas most of the feminists hail from the upper or middle class background. So, Ritu Menon would say that post partition the abducted women free themselves, and yet they stick to the traditional values in the making of the family. So, women of the Hindutva movement, for example, seek to restore the Hindu men in position of dominance in the family and in the society. This would apply also in the case of women from the Muslim community that support the communalist, the fundamentalist factions. Women that kind of enable the ideas of fundamentalism. So, we see in the post partition era something that Menon calls as fundamentalist traditionalism, something that is ostensibly giving us some freedom, giving women some freedom and referring to contemporary political objectives, and yet interweaving these modern objectives with extremely puritanical orthodox views about women's position in the society. Barbara Metcalfe finds link between fundamentalism and nationalism. So, they are like doppelgangers, they are doubles, and so women that engage in activism do not necessarily mobilize against patriarchal domination. So, activism and agency for in the case of a woman, are not directly proportional. So, the Hindu or the Muslim women that have, or even the Sikh women from that support the nationalist, the ardent fervent nationalist position and sacrifice themselves, that preach the values of female sacrifice, female docility, are actually supporting a very orthodox or very let us say they accept the limited space that have been traditionally given to women in all the societies. So, Patricia Jeffrey would say that women's agency may improve, yet they may be worse off than before. So, what are women using their agency, to what end are the women using their agency? Are they employing their agency towards their own freedom, or are they fighting for a cause where which would not make them visible, which would further marginalize their position? Are they fighting for a masculinist cause? Are they adopting the values of patriarchy and reinstating those values? So, according to Patricia Jeffrey, women should channelize the energy that they commonly invest on protecting families, protecting communal, familial and national values towards creating possibilities that liberate the women. So, immediate post partition decades see that when the national borders were fluctuating and not really hardened, women had an extraordinary amount of autonomy suddenly, and they could choose, for example, their marital partners. But after India and Pakistan hardened their boundaries, and we see the states assumed the role of protector and provider, and women's women's freedom along with the children were curbed. They were so the nations were formed through establishing systematic control and dominance on women and children. So, the new nations insisted on establishing where the women and the children belonged. And so, the nationalist women, it is a paradox that the nationalist women who have committed in nationalized mobilization are engaged in causes that may not serve their own rights. So, nationalism and women's rights do not conventionally go hand in hand. So, women were not only victims of larger socio-political processes, but the middle class values, the middle class expresses the agency through freedom they derive from parda, right, whereas poor sections actually. So, we see that the concept of liberty, the concept of agency is also differentially understood across the different classes and different castes. For the middle class people, they the expression of agency is through their ability to practice parda. So, freedom is derived through parda, whereas for the Dalit women, freedom is enjoyed through songs and rituals that defy any kind of control and prescription on them, through practices and rituals that defy prescriptions and control. And so, ethnic and religious differences hinder women's solidarity, and communal divide limit the women who are themselves practitioners of communal stereotypes. So, what one is trying to get at here is that in the process of belonging to a particular community and becoming practitioner of communal stereotypes, women from one community is turned against the other, and this does not benefit women from either of the community. It benefits the homosocial discourse at large. So, women's complicity in communal violence ends up harming them the most. Studies conducted by Feldman and Rouse in Bangladesh and Pakistan, where they see Islamic movements as a response to women's increased economic independence. We have already talked about the policies that different government regimes actually adopted, and so the more liberal leaders would let women come out and take up jobs and participate in the public arena, orthodox governments would punish women for the same act. And so, modernity is seen as a threat that actually vitiates the traditional values that are defined through women's activities. So, it is possible that a woman either privileges her communal identities or her interest as an individual woman in terms of gender. So, the communal interest and the woman's individual interests commonly do not, in most times, in most cases, they do not go hand in hand. They have an anti-relationship, they have a kind of inverse relationship. So, with this I would like to I would like to stop here, and I would like to conclude today's lecture. Thank you.